Very warm Easter greetings to you all, and especially those in the Kingston Episcopal area of the Diocese of Southwark. I want to offer a short reflection for the third Sunday of Easter, which is based on the wonderful story in Luke chapter 24 of two of the disciples meeting the risen Christ when they were walking on a journey from Jerusalem to Emmaus, about 7 miles away. I've certainly found in the midst of the lockdown and the coronavirus pandemic that as I've read the Easter stories afresh, I've been really impacted by the enormity of the claims that our Christian faith makes about Jesus and all that he means to our world in every situation, including the one we're in now. In Christ, the Christian faith tells us God is in our midst in every situation. In Jesus' death and resurrection, it has cosmic significance for all time about the saving of our world and our lives. There are enormous claims that are made in all of the writings of the New Testament as they try to explain the mystery of Christ's death and resurrection. So it means that a very basic question for the first disciples, which continues for us today, is, can these claims be true? Can they really mean all that they seem to? My first encounters in a serious way with the Christian faith were during my secondary school years in the late 1960s and early 1970s. I'd started attending the youth club at Emmanuel Church in Tolworth and was learning about some of the claims of Christ. One of the songs that we used to sing in that youth club was entitled, "Can It Be True, the Things They Say of You?" It was Youth Praise number 36 for those of you of that particular era. Now that title of the song, "Can It Be True?" has been something which has stayed with me throughout my Christian life. It's really important, the truth claims of our Christian faith. For me, I've never wanted faith to see faith simply as a psychological prop or as some kind of private truth which I or even a large group of people hold together, but rather as something which points to the deepest truths about reality and about life and about God. At the same time as I was attending that youth club at Emmanuel Tolworth, I was also specialising more and more in science as my secondary school career went on. And I was learning about the enormous power of science also to explore the world and give us real insights into the way the world is. And one of the things I was very keen on was to work out how that scientific understanding of reality related to the Christian one, which I was increasingly getting engaged in during those years. The deepest truths are important in every situation. That challenge of faith and belief has been there right from the start of Christian times. If you look at the resurrection stories in the Gospels, you'll find that in the earliest of them, in Mark, at the end of that resurrection story, the women flee in fear. They're in puzzlement and wonder as to what was going on. In Luke's Gospel, when the disciples are told about the empty tomb, we're told that they tried to dismiss it as an idle tale. In Matthew's Gospel, in the story in Galilee, we're told that some worshipped Jesus, but also some doubted. And in John's Gospel, we have the wonderful story of St. Thomas and his wrestling with, can this really be true about the risen Christ? So there's no doubt that that struggle to believe and take on board these claims has been there right from the start. And it's still a challenge in our time today, and perhaps particularly so when we live in a culture which is so imbued by secularism and so shaped by science in its way of seeing the world and reality. The current coronavirus pandemic and the crisis that we're all in is something which has shaped all of us and shaken the foundations very much of the way in which we live. and it's made us think very hard about the basis of our lives and our faith. And so, as well as an existential challenge, which of course it is, it's also an opportunity to reflect on these deep truths of the Christian faith, of God's salvation in Christ, and what that might mean in our world today. One of the upsides of the current situation has been a new respect for truth-seeking and for experts. Our politicians are saying repeatedly they are following the science, because they know that science gives us good, accurate, reliable information on which to make our judgments and our decisions. And that is certainly true, and a very good thing indeed. But we do need to be a little bit careful that we don't overstep the mark with that, because we can find that science can become the sole arbiter of what truth actually is, the sole arbiter of how we can describe reality. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that science can indeed tell us wonderful things about the world in which we live in. It's an enormously powerful method of exploring God's world. But it also has its limits, and many well-known scientists have written about the limits of science. It's less good about telling us, exploring deep questions of meaning and purpose and value in our lives. For some of those things, to explore that, if you like, more full reality of our lives, we need things like poetry and music and great art. We also need, I would suggest, our theology, our beliefs, and our worship. And all of those can take us more deeply into the deepest realities of our lives and our existence. So how are we to enter more deeply into the truths of the Easter hope, of the resurrection story? How are we to answer the question for ourselves in this very challenging time of the coronavirus epidemic? The basic question of faith: can it be true, the things they say of you about Jesus? Well, in the Emmaus Road story, which is the gospel reading set for the third Sunday of Easter, the two disciples, Cleopas and an unnamed one, were walking from Jerusalem across to Emmaus, about 7 miles away, and they were deep in conversation about what had happened. We're told that the risen Christ came alongside them and shared with them. And as they did that walk, and I know many people are going on extra walks at the moment in our exercise times, so perhaps can identify with that journeying along. As Christ came alongside them, the disciples found the truth of Christ, their answer to that question, their wrestling, in 3 particular ways, I believe. The first was through their own hard experience and their reflection of it. They were wrestling, and you can see them wondering. That questioning and thinking is a good thing in our Christian journey. But they also listened to Christ, expounding the scriptures, of explaining why the Messiah had to die and would rise again. And perhaps in this time of lockdown, it's a real opportunity for us to read those stories afresh, perhaps with a little more time and depth than normal, to think about what those scriptures are saying to us, and to hear the voice of Christ through the words of the Bible. And then the disciples also learnt about the truth of Christ through their own prayer and worship and sharing with Christ in a meal together. And in those times of worship and prayer, very often God can speak to us. Again, in this time of lockdown, people are very often finding that the new ways of praying and worshipping which we're having to embrace are actually giving us new depths of insight into our faith. Truth does matter in all things. It matters in our Christian faith. It matters in science. It matters in life. And the resurrection hope The huge claims about Jesus in our Christian faith are not just private belief, a psychological prop, but rather they point to the transforming, self-giving, sacrificial love, which is the deepest reality of all at the heart of the life of God and the universe. So I hope and pray in this Easter season, as we move through this challenging time of lockdown with all the trials and tribulations that is bringing to us, I hope and pray that God will enable us to be led more deeply into the truth of the mystery of faith, that Christ has died, Christ is risen, and Christ will come again, and the real hope that that faith brings to all creation in these troubled times.